What a game! Now, I was going to sit down and sketch out this whole review. I was going to plan everything out in regards to exactly which points I'm going to hit. And I do have some notes. I do have some things that I want to touch on. But the overall sentiment I need to get across is just how much Ratchet and Clank: A Rift Apart blew me the hell away. Maybe it's because I'm playing it in amongst this general sort of time period where we're waiting to see exactly what the new systems can do. You know, on the PlayStation 5 side, we've had Returnal, which is obviously a very meaty, very enjoyable game. But for me, there weren't really any parts of that game where I sort of looked at it and went, okay, that couldn't be done anywhere else. I wasn't necessarily looking at it on a rendering level, on a graphical level. It was always like, oh, you know, if you turn the resolution down or you turn down, you know, there are ways to make that game work on a PlayStation 4, PlayStation 4 Pro. Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, from the very beginning, especially during the opening ceremony section, is literally just Insomniac going, okay, we're clearly some of the best in the business. We are absolutely going to show you what the PlayStation 5 can do. And for me, on the consumer side, on the gameplay side, it's been an absolute joy just seeing what a team can do with a piece of hardware when they're starting developing something and sticking with that console the whole way through. So obviously, you know, looking at the footage that we have on screen now, you'll be able to tell the graphics are first and foremost the thing that a lot of people will be talking about. And I think one of the underlying mentalities that comes through, because Insomniac have had the time to build a game from scratch on the PlayStation 5 using the SSD architecture from day one, is that this game is absolutely showing off what that system can do. To the point where, you know, we always knew in the trailers that it was going to deal with multiple dimensions, that you were going to be going through different wormholes, and that the game was going to try and load things on the other side of those wormholes. But how much of that would be scripted, how much of that would be in game, how much would we actually have direct control over tearing a hole in the side of a level and all of a sudden emerging on the other side of it. The way that they've done it is that these things that we've seen in the trailers are still kind of set pieces where you're, you know, going down a certain path, you're going through one of the holes in the levels, and it opens up something on the other side. That stuff is still on rails, but it is still rendering a whole other world on the other side of that tear in reality. But the thing that blew me away were the pocket dimensions, where you can just go to sides of levels and just hit L1, tear a hole in the side of the level, and all of a sudden there's a whole other play space right there on the other side. The first time that I realized that I could do that I could walk through the side of a level and emerge somewhere else, genuinely blew my mind. I can't think how they coded that. I don't know if the game has a whole bunch of side levels just sitting there waiting for you to access. You know, when you do go through the side of a level, that whole thing just blows my mind, and I love the feeling of not knowing exactly how they've done that. Just as a side note, so many genres, so many game devs, we know exactly what to expect, and I think finally seeing something like the SSD, just, you know, this is what the PlayStation can do. This is what an SSD can do on a console game, is absolutely brilliant. So I need to shout that side of things out. It is unbelievable the amount of rendering tech on display, the amount of just the sheer level of detail, the level of rendering that's there, the background detail, the particle effects, the smoke effects, everything else, never dropping a frame whatsoever, and only letting you jump from one dimension to the next, one level to the next, with zero loading the whole time through. It's kind of crazy. Maybe people on the PC side of things have been experiencing things like this for a while, but coupled with a game design that prioritizes a really instant feel of motion, some really responsive controls, and a general sensibility of prioritizing animation and just wowing you up front, the whole package comes together in a way that I can't say I wasn't expecting at all. I mean, it is Insomniac, but when you start playing this game, the level of showmanship that's here, the confidence that's here, is absolutely astonishing. And I genuinely, like, I was like this the whole time I played through it, about 13 hours-ish to get through it, and just, what a game. So I'll continue breaking stuff down, but I'm a giddy man. I've been wanting to see something like this since we saw the initial footage of the PlayStation 5, the initial idea of what it could do. And Rift Apart is absolutely emblematic of what this generation can give us and what, you know, Sony's first party, the likes of Insomniac, can put together. All of this general level of prowess translates over into some of the biggest levels that Insomniac have done for a Ratchet and Clank game ever in the franchise, really. And one really cool thing is how much they've kind of taken a page out of Naughty Dog's book, or Uncharted 4's book, and given you a grappling hook so that you can kind of factor that into gameplay. But you're exploring this sort of wide linear expanse, kind of like the way that Uncharted Lost Legacy and Uncharted 4 have done. Interspersed with different combat, combat arenas in there. But also they give you, Ratchet has some new mechanics. You get some jet boots, so you can get around a lot faster. You also have a dash that you can use in combat. And again, just for the sake of showing off, you don't become another entity when you dash. It doesn't become like a blur on screen. They just quadruple or, multiply your character model just for the sake of showing, hey, look, we can load multiple character models in a second or less than a second while you're dashing around in amongst everything else. It's a really, really cool effect. And in regards to the levels themselves, you just have these really big, inviting, luscious play spaces that are loaded with collectibles, pieces of armor and upgrades to find. Obviously the usual stuff like bolts, things that you're going to use to upgrade the weapons. But we do have a new armor system where you have helmet, body, and the pants that you can just swap around however you want, different combinations that factor into different damage types or different doing different damage amounts to different types of enemies, things like that. I'm always going to go Fashion Souls style and go with whatever looks best, but you can mix and match however you want. And speaking of combat, this is easily one of the most impressive combat models I've ever played, I've ever seen. I've played a lot of games, and the most impressive thing that Insomniac have put together. I really liked what they did in 2016's Ratchet and Clank, where it was just, it was a platformer, you hold the left trigger, all of a sudden the camera swings behind you and it turns into a third-person shooter, which is obviously what they've done over the years. Ratchet and Clank has been going since 2002, but in terms of, their flirtations with making it more of a shooter over the years, it was only really in 2016's one and now in Rift Apart that I feel like they've perfected that hybrid style of platforming and gunplay. You can easily go between the two and it just works. To quote Todd Howard, it just totally works. It's very fluid, very smooth. And you can dash out of things. You can animation cancel if you need to get away from a different enemy. You can double jump, you can air dash. There's just lots of momentum and movement options that keep things going. One slight negative to throw in here is that you're still relying on using D-pad shortcuts to switch between weapons very quickly. It's not like they've allocated, specific buttons per weapon. They didn't go down the Doom Eternal route of, they could have mapped the Rhino, which is a big fancy weapon, to one of the specific buttons. But you're either bringing up the weapon wheel or you're tapping the D-pad after you've allocated weapons to the shortcuts. Personally, I would like it if they could find a way to, let you throw a couple grenades out, switch to a rocket launcher, switch to a machine gun, switch to the pixelizer or whatever on the fly. I think that might be even more chaotic, but as it stands, it's very easy to just hold triangle, pick a different weapon or tap the D-pad and get some good combos going that way as well. Another thing to point out with the gameplay is just the level of variety that's on display. Like, you have the wide linear open world stuff that you would expect from Ratchet and Clank in terms of the gunplay, the way that you're interfacing with these enemies, with these worlds. But you also have some dedicated puzzle sections with Clank that are very Lemmings style, albeit in 3D, where you're just sort of guiding different versions of his consciousness, his predetermined paths through a level where they might go, and then deviating different things off with different power-ups. Maybe you need to weight down part of the level, maybe you need to make the gravity change in a different part. You're just trying to get a number of these miniature Clank holograms to the end of a different level. And that's just nice and satisfying. It breaks up everything else. Alongside that is some tank style levels with a little character called Glitch, who's a little droid hacker thing that you're putting into different computers and then playing it like a tank section. A little bit like Batman Arkham Knight, I guess, but with way better movement. Just, unleashing volleys of clusters of missiles and machine guns onto different parts of a virus so you can clean out some different circuitry. That's just really, really cool too. The main showcase is obviously what you will be doing for the majority of the time, which is playing as Ratchet and Rivet. But the likes of the Clank levels and the Glitch levels, it's a nice way to keep things moving so that you don't get tired of just the same open world stuff or the same shooting stuff over and over. Speaking of Rivet, you'll know her from the trailers. She's the dimensional counterpart to Ratchet. So when everything gets blown apart by Dr. Nefarious at the beginning, or the different realms or the different realities get split, then Rivet is sort of just what Ratchet would have been in a different dimension. Which also opens up the idea that there are, alternate versions of all these different characters, which I'm obviously not going to spoil in terms of the way the entire story rolls out. But a main character is Kit, someone that wasn't covered in the pre-release trailers, which is the alternate version of Clank. And because Ratchet and Clank get split up, again, I'm not going to do full spoilers, but the outset of the game is that Ratchet and Clank get split up. Ratchet ends up teaming up with Kit, who is the alternate version of Clank, and Rivet ends up teaming up with Clank, and so they form two different teams for the vast majority of what happens going forward. But honestly, I love what they did here. I think that it will jar with some people who just want to play as Ratchet and Clank. And I think they could have done more with that. There's one key part in the story where it feels like we're going in a very specific direction in terms of a Ratchet and Clank payoff. And they don't do that. So it's like something like that sometimes gets in the way. But overall, the chemistry between Ratchet and Kit's sort of like an even more nervous version of Clank, and the chemistry between Rivet and Clank really, really works. I absolutely love what they've done with Rivet. She sort of starts out being the kind of modern day archetypal girl boss go-to attitude in terms of I don't need you, I don't need any of this. Kind of Rey from Star Wars Force Awakens at the beginning of that movie, but almost immediately is sort of disarmed by how charming Clank is and the fact that they do get on really, really well. And that she, does have a history. There's a reason why she has the robotic arm and sort of her relationship to robots. I mean, it's not, it's not super deep storytelling, but I appreciate it for what it was. It's also worth pointing out here that the general tone is way more mature than I think any other Ratchet and Clank has been before. I know that they have done bits and pieces with Ratchet's, the Lombaxes, Ratchet's history, and him trying to find more of his species and then giving up and things like that. But the general tone is quite somber for most of it. You only really get pockets of energy from Ratchet and Rivet with both Clank and Kit. Sort of lamenting what's happened beforehand, what's led to all the rifts being split apart and everything like that. Again, it's weird to talk about this level of narrative depth or tone in a Ratchet and Clank game, but all the same, for as much as they're exploring these different ways of doing levels, these sort of taking pages from Naughty Dog's book, I quite like that they round the characters out in such a nice way. I think they could do more with the payoff in the third act, but you do spend a lot of time getting quite emotionally invested in where these characters are and what's really happening with them and what makes them tick and why the likes of, why Rivet complements Clank, how she can bring things out of him in a way that, Clank can do the same to her. I think that dynamic is really, really cool. And Rivet herself is just a great character. Like, I love the visual of her. She looks awesome. She's very dynamic, very charismatic. And she's a joy to play as, for as much as it might be easy to go to the idea of a character swap and be like, oh my god, it's Raiden Snake again, I just want to play as Ratchet. Rivet is brilliant, and that stuff works really, 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 really well. So with all this super positive stuff, I had to struggle to think of a negative. I genuinely think it is the best PlayStation 5 game so far. It is easily the most recommended one. It's easily the thing that you should put on and go, look what this system can do. It's also the apex of, 3D platforming in the modern day. It just feels incredible, rolling together everything that you'd want from the genre, from tight platforming sections, some more optional challenging stuff in the pocket dimensions, to the idea of just hoovering up collectibles, revisiting levels, making sure you do everything. I am 2% off the platinum for this because there's a glitch with one of the collectibles that needs to be rectified. That'll be in one of the day one patches, but I'm almost there. That's how much I've played this thing, and it is immaculate. But in terms of negatives, the only thing that I can think of is that some of the mini bosses, the more mech-based mini bosses, tend to use one attack on you. It's one purple laser beam. That's all they have. There are a variety of mini bosses, including dinosaurs and different mech types, but there's one mech type, this big sort of bruiser thing that comes in and you fight quite a few times over the story, that only attacks you one way. And you will notice it. You will notice that you are evading and fighting it the exact same way over and over and over again. Obviously, there is some variety there in terms of the weapons that you'll use, but ultimately, that's one thing that I noticed. Like, oh god, here comes the purple laser guy again. But again, for the overwhelming vast majority, this game is absolutely immaculate. A thoroughly proficient and perfected ride, an absolute masterclass in how to craft a video game, how to craft an interactive entertainment experience. I've already played through it twice. I adore it. I look forward to going through it again when it's been touched up with the some of the day one stuff. But yeah, a resounding 5 stars, the best PlayStation 5 game so far, and something that is easily indicative of what we can expect from the rest of the generation. Utterly, utterly blown away. I should have probably said at the beginning of this video that I'm Scott Tailford from WhatCulture.com, but instead I'll end with it and just go enjoy Ratchet and Clank like I have, because it's brilliant.